Chapter 6, Tool Support for Testing. 6.1.1, Test Tool Classification. Tool support for performance measurement and dynamic analysis. This is best used in an active environment. Performance testing tools is meant to test at a system level to see if it can handle high volumes of a load test, which checks to see if the system can handle a large number of transactions. A volume test, which checks to see if the system can handle a large amount of data. And a stress test, which checks to see if the system can handle traffic beyond the design. It can do all three or mix and match of the three. Monitoring tools are used to continuously keep track of the status of the system, like servers, networks, databases, security, performance, and internet usage. And it's useful to identify problems. A dynamic analysis tool is also called just an analysis tool. It's not a testing tool that requires code to be running because it studies what happens behind the scenes while the code is running. Tool support for specialized testing needs. There's data quality assessment. There are tools that exist to store and assess large amounts of data, which are often interrelated. There's data conversion and migration, which review and verify that data has migrated properly. There's usability testing, which helps to assess the user experience, like a survey, and tests that can check for issues, like if there's an actual bug in your site. There's accessibility testing. For example, sites must be disability friendly, like an audio screen reader for people who cannot see. Localization testing, which is also called the internationalization, and it makes sure that the system is understood in different countries and cultures. And this also requires human intelligence. This is an important one here because how many times have you gotten something off of Amazon and the instructions for it make absolutely no sense? This is a perfect example of when places cheap out and they don't use their localization testing correctly. Security testing is when the test tries to break into the system and focuses on the network, support software, application code, and underlying database. You can have one for all of them or just some of the others. And then there's portability testing, which is when you test software on the different platforms and different environments. For example, you could be watching this video on a tablet, on a phone, on a computer, or even on a TV if you've got streaming service. So you need to make sure that this is portable and YouTube and all the devices. 6.1.2, benefits and risks of test automation. I want to take a second here because in the book, it gives benefits a really small section, and then it gives the risks a huge section. But that's because the benefits are so obvious, and it is so tempting to use so much automation. But there are a lot of risks, and they need to be considered when you're starting a company or when you're starting to use testing in a company. The first benefit is it's a reduction in the repetitive manual work, reduces boredom, time, mistakes, and frustration. For example, if you have to manually run through a test over and over and over again, after a while, you kind of stop paying attention to what you're doing and you have some human error. So that often is a problem because you'll go, oh, wait a minute, did you enter this information or did the system enter this information when you hit, autofill, something like that? So it's really easy to get lost in it after you've done the same test a couple of times. There's greater consistency and repeatability, and it creates consistent results, which eliminates the human error, which we talked about. For example, did you click the OK button on the site or did you hit return on the keyboard when you're on a website and you're signing up for something? Something as simple as that, when you're doing software testing, it's important to know, did you hit that OK button or did you actually hit return on your keyboard? Another thing is when you typed in your name, did you hit a space afterward? Because a lot of times that's a habit. You type something in and you hit space without realizing it. So that's a human error that you go, I don't know if I hit the space button bar afterward. It's more objective assessments. The automated tools remove the subjective bias. A lot of times you just go in to something assuming it's going to be one way or another, and it's not, especially for developers. It's easier to access the information about testing. The tools can make charts and graphs with the data that can make it easier for humans to understand. We actually have a website that will tell you exactly why it failed. That reason may not always make sense and may need interpretation, but it will say failed because of XYZ. And that makes it a lot easier for us to break down and go find whether or not there's a bug or whether or not that error is meant to happen. And then there are the risks of using tools, which is a lot. There's time, cost, and effort. During the initial introduction, the needs of successfully using the tool may be underestimated, so the business needs to carefully study the needs of using the tool. And this is a little off topic, but I went through and I mentioned the business has to purchase and implement the tool, which is expensive, and then they have to train the employees on it. Then they have to document the process in case it has to be repeated or audited. And then the tool needs to be maintained over time. Sometimes you have to update contracts and licenses, and you might even need to repeat training. And then the tool may require consultation from an external expert on occasion. So those are all expenses. It's a huge investment for a company to decide to start using automated tests. If you have bad planning for your maintenance, the effort required to support automated tests are often underestimated. So the business needs to make sure that someone is responsible for the test suite. And you don't even actually have to be doing the testing, but it's something like keeping up with your contracts, keeping up with your licenses, keeping up with your software, keeping up with the experts, keeping up with your vendors, and listening to your testers when you ask them for feedback. So all those things are really a good manager, but those are things to consider. And then there's the configuration management. Because test sets and or interoperability may be neglected, someone may be assigned responsible for its upkeep. For example, where I work, we had a new version of the software come out every day. And so today it would be, 1.1, tomorrow 1.2, the next day 1.3. But they changed the way they do the versions, and now it's based on how many bugs have gone into it fixed. So today could be 1.1, and if they fix 10 bugs in the next set, then tomorrow will be 1.11. And then they fix, 2 bugs the next day. So then the next day is 1.13, and it becomes really complicated. So this, from my point of view as a software tester, it's very frustrating. But for the developers, they actually really like it because they can tell how big or how little their software updates will be. So it's just a matter of whoever's in charge of the configuration management, what they decided to be the lesser of the two evils. And I'm sorry, configuration management is repeated. It shouldn't have been. There's also lack of ownership. With no clear owner of the tool, the system can quickly decay. So the business has to assign one owner to maintain the licenses, updates, contracts, etc. And then there's the tool vendor. If you're buying this tool from someone else, or if you make your own, in either case, the tool needs upkeep, especially if you get it through a vendor. The tools can go extinct. The business should be prepared for that eventuality. It may go out of business, they may retire the tool, or they just sell the tool to a different vendor. You may have poor response times, support upgrades, and defect fixes. Also, a new technology may be supported by the testing tool may not be supported by the testing tool from the vendor. So when I talk about they're going out of business, retiring the tool, or selling the tool to a different vendor, think of the last time you bought a smartphone and how much it cost, and then think that the company expects you to replace that every 2 years. Would you do that with a refrigerator? No. I just spent $1,000 on a phone, and then when it wasn't working, they told me it's considered legacy, vintage. And I was very frustrated because I was like, this costs more than my refrigerator that I just replaced. I can't imagine replacing my refrigerator every 2 years. What is going on? So that made me really frustrated, and I don't want to do business with that company anymore. Then the poor response times, upgrades, defects, fixes. It's really frustrating to me if you go to a website, you have a complaint on something, and they don't have a phone number where you could call, or they don't have a chat feature. They just have email us, and then you hope that they'll email you back. That's something to consider. And then new technology may be supported by the it may not be supported by the testing tool from the vendor. So let's say that you are running a company, you've come up with a new feature on your software and it's great and you want to test it, but the testing tool does not work with it. What do you do in that situation? Do you retire your testing tool? What if you've already paid for the year of licensing on it? Do you go out and buy another one? How do you fix this? So those are all things to consider that the business needs to have in mind. More risks of using tools is that there is too much reliance. The automated test can be seen as replacement for test design, execution, or manual test. And I want to stop and point this out here. I specifically use that picture because where I work, we have so many tests expected from us, even from the manual testers, because they want us to start a test and then send them the results so that they can finish it manually, which is fine. But that means that I have to do my work and then half of their work. And when you are doing that every day, several times a day, it gets really frustrating. And to add to that, they don't realize how much time and effort we have to put into a test. So one thing that I've started to do is when they ask me for a new type of test, I take the time to have a meeting with them and show them exactly how much work is expected from me that they're doing. Because I want them to know if they're going to have me do these tests, if they're going to put this new responsibility on me, it needs to be worthwhile, or they need to add more members of our team. So that's actually a really big problem for us is the too much reliance. They expect us to do our jobs and half of theirs. And I understand that they need that done. It makes a lot more sense for us to come to them with a half prepared test, but it makes them more efficient, but it makes us less efficient. Expectations, they may be unrealistic. So the business needs to have clear objectives for the tool. A lot of times people don't understand when I tell them what the error is that we're seeing on the site. It doesn't make sense to them and they get frustrated and I have to explain, listen, the computer can only tell us what it does or does not see in the program. It cannot tell us why there's a problem. So that's something to keep in mind. And then you have bad planning for maintenance. The effort required to support automated tests is often underestimated. So the business needs to make sure that someone is responsible for the test suite. It's actually a lot of work every single day to update all of our tests we have to update the test input to reflect the test updates. And we have to update the script that keeps the two together.